I had always imagined that the most astonishing discovery upon returning to my property from an extended journey might involve a clan of especially bold raccoons, or perhaps a toppled tree. It never crossed my mind that I would arrive home to a 3-story, partly built, beige monstrosity, bearing a striking resemblance to a low-cost hotel, situated squarely on my inherited farmland. Indeed, you understood correctly. A hotel erected on my land. This tale is truly incredible, and its resolution is something you won't anticipate. My profession is that of a land management consultant with expertise in agricultural preservation and riparian rights, a detail that, believe me, proves to be exceptionally pertinent. I had been absent for half a year, engaged in a project in Southeast Asia where I assisted in creating sustainable irrigation systems for traditional rice paddies. While the work was fulfilling, I longed to return to my tranquil haven, a 100-acre farm held by my family for 5 generations. This property adjoins a nature preserve on one flank and, on the other, is progressively encroached upon by an expanding suburban enclave known as Whispering Pines Estates, which boasts its own infamously assertive homeowners association. My past interactions with them had been minor disagreements, objections regarding my untended fields, which is simply farming, people, or the rooster's early morning crowing, again a part of farming. However, no prior experience could have readied me for what I encountered. As I drove up my lengthy gravel driveway, an unsettling feeling already began to creep in. An unfamiliar, low hum resonated in the air. Then my eyes beheld it. Looming over my tree-line, on the very spot where my great-grandfather's old hay barn once stood, was this edifice. It consisted of 3 levels of cinder block and Tyvek wrap, bustling with construction personnel in hard hats. For an instant, I truly believed I was experiencing a jet lag-induced hallucination. I brought my truck to a halt, my hands clutching the steering wheel with such force that my knuckles turned white, and I simply gazed in disbelief. My property, my lovely, fertile, and historically important land, was being desecrated by what seemed to be a budget-friendly inn. The sheer impudence was astounding. I exited my vehicle, my legs somewhat unsteady, and proceeded towards the building site. A stocky foreman, clad in a grease-smudged shirt, stopped me. "Can I assist you, friend? This is private land." I inhaled deeply, composing myself. "In fact," I stated, my tone surprisingly composed given the volcanic anger simmering within me, "this is my private property, and you, along with this structure, are trespassing." He sneered. Truly, he sneered. "Oh sure. This here is the new Whispering Pines Community Lodge, an HOA initiative. We have all the necessary permits." He gestured vaguely in the direction of a dilapidated trailer serving as an office. It was at that moment I observed her emerging from the trailer, moving as if she held title to the premises, which, I suppose, in her perception, she did. Brenda Stone, the HOA president, a woman in her 50s, was attired in strikingly bright pink athletic leisure wear that likely exceeded the cost of my monthly mortgage installment. Her expression was one of self-satisfied dominance. She operated a white Escalade, invariably parked at a cocky slant in the HOA office parking area, occupying 2 spaces. Well, see what's appeared," Brenda warbled, her tones saturated with overly sweet condescension. "Decided at last to pay a visit to your farm, have we?" Her gaze dismissively swept over my travel-worn attire. "Brenda," I stated, maintaining an even tone, "what in the world is this appalling structure doing on my property?" She offered a slight smile that failed to convey any warmth to her eyes. "Oh dear, there seems to be a misunderstanding. This is now HOA land. We obtained it. It's a vital community enhancement, you understand, for the improvement of Whispering Pines." She touched my arm with a pat, an action I am certain she intended to be reassuring, but it felt like the contact of a serpent. "We dispatched all the notifications. I suppose you were too preoccupied with your travels." I withdrew my arm. "I had no notifications, Brenda, and this property has never been on the market. It is a heritage farm safeguarded by multiple agricultural covenants. You do not have the right to simply take it." Her smile became more strained. "Oh, I believe you will discover that we can. We possess the documentation, surveys, everything is perfectly legitimate. Your land was judged to be underused. An unsightly blot, to be candid. We are enhancing it. It will feature a charming small cafe, a compact gymnasium, and accommodations for guests visiting the estates. Is it not wonderful? Wonderful? She described this profanation as wonderful. The fury had transformed into a frigid, solid knot in my gut. This was beyond mere haughtiness, it was deliberate larceny. What Brenda was unaware of, what she could not possibly comprehend in her petty domain of suburban intimidation, was that I had foreseen an eventuality of this nature, albeit perhaps not of this magnitude. For an extended period, I had observed the covetous glint in the gazes of particular HOA board members as they surveyed my land. I understood their desire for growth, for additional facilities to validate their excessive charges. Consequently, prior to my departure for Asia, I had dedicated substantial time with my legal counsel, a highly intelligent, formidable woman named Ms. Albright, who was an expert in precisely these types of property disagreements and corporate wrongdoing. We did more than revise my will, we reinforced the legal protections surrounding my land. We conveyed the central portion of the land into a highly particular kind of irrevocable agricultural trust, which included an extensive list of extremely specific stipulations and penalty provisions for any unapproved construction or interference. The terminology was complex, at times antiquated, and crafted to be indecipherable to anyone lacking profound knowledge of historical land titles and trust legislation. Furthermore, we ordered a completely new, exceptionally thorough boundary survey, submitted it to the county, and positioned discrete, coded markers, not conspicuous concrete pillars, but nearly unseen metallic pins at exact GPS locations cited in the trust papers. We even recorded, with timestamped and geolocated images and soil analyses, an ecologically delicate area of uncommon native bog orchids near the former barn location referenced in the trust documents, orchids that were now, almost undoubtedly, entombed beneath several tons of concrete foundation. The elegance of the snare lay in its inconspicuousness. There were no large keep-out notices, no hostile fencing beyond what was required for my, thankfully, now absent farm animals. Our aim was for them to become complacent, to grow overconfident. We intended for them to step directly into it. And indeed, Brenda, you and your Whispering Pines associates had not merely stumbled into it. You had performed an elaborate jig right into its center, shod in heavy boots. Documentation, did you mention? I responded, a faint smile now gracing my lips. I would be exceedingly curious to examine this documentation, Brenda. And your surveys? For I possess my own, and I have a feeling they narrate a significantly different account. Her eyes contracted marginally. A brief sign of something? Doubt? No, more likely mere irritation at my persistent presence. Everything is registered at the HOA office and with the county, entirely lawful. Now, if you will pardon us, we must adhere to a construction timeline. She pivoted to disregard me like a monarch dismissing an irksome commoner. The foreman grinned, obviously following her lead. I remained standing, observing them, the hum of generators and the resounding clash of metal, a prelude to their approaching downfall. They were completely oblivious. They presumed they were contending with a simple rural landowner they could effortlessly steamroll. They failed to grasp they were confronting an individual who comprehended the earth they were defiling and the statutes regulating it more thoroughly than they comprehended their own pretentious regulations. This was destined to be more than a mere struggle, it was to be an instructive experience, and I surmised that the lesson was imminent. The primary teaching: never misjudge a reserved man devoted to his land, particularly when that man can quickly contact Ms. Albright. The following morning, subsequent to a restless night interrupted by the remote, infuriating noises of building activity, I arrived at the county records office prior to its opening. Brenda Stone had bragged about their entirely lawful documentation being registered, and I was keen to inspect this work of fabrication. County archives are familiar territory for me. My profession frequently requires delving into deed lineages and water entitlements dating back many years. The clerk, a congenial woman named Doris, with whom I had conversed during earlier research visits, welcomed me cheerfully. "Returned for more ancient, dusty papers, Mr. Henderson?" she inquired. "Something of that nature, Doris," I answered, investigating a new undertaking by the Whispering Pines HOA. "They assert they have obtained a plot of land bordering their own. A plot that I am quite certain belongs to me." Doris's eyebrows lifted. "Oh my. Those Whispering Pines individuals can certainly be tenacious." That was a very diplomatic description. For the subsequent 3 hours, I painstakingly examined plat maps, zoning regulations, recent property conveyances, and permit requests. And I found it, a quick claim deed allegedly executed by a holding corporation unfamiliar to me, ceding a 100-acre tract, my 100-acre tract, to the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. The signature was an amateurish counterfeit of what they likely conjectured my signature resembled, derived from some publicly accessible record. The notary seal appeared dubious, the name unknown. Following that was the survey they had presented. It was a careless piece of craftsmanship evidently produced by an individual aiming for a preset result instead of a precise representation of the terrain. Boundary demarcations were manipulated, vital markers disregarded. They had even contrived to shift a major watercourse that served as a natural property border in their rendition. It was, succinctly put, an act of audacious deception. My temper flared, yet I maintained my self-control, systematically capturing images of each document with my mobile phone and verifying dates and signatories. All the permits for the community lodge were present, routinely approved by a subordinate planning officer recognized for being, shall we say, receptive to developers possessing substantial funds. Curiously, the environmental impact assessment was notably insubstantial, scarcely acknowledging the agricultural character of the property, much less the fragile ecosystem of the bog orchids I had so meticulously recorded. Equipped with reproductions of their deceitful papers, my subsequent destination was Ms. Albright's legal practice. She paid attention, her eyes sparkling with what could only be termed professional delight as I detailed the circumstances and arranged the incriminating documents on her mahogany conference room table. My, she remarked, selecting the counterfeit deed with a set of tweezers she genuinely maintained for these exact moments. Brenda Stone and her cheerful crew of suburban buccaneers have undeniably been industrious. This is more than simple trespass, Mr. Henderson. This involves conspiracy, fraudulent activity, and document falsification. It's a veritable buffet of civil wrongs. She reclined, a rapacious smile forming on her face. They have marched directly into the snare we prepared, have they not? Every one of those stipulations in the Agricultural Trust, I would bet they have already breached at least 50% of them. We dedicated the remainder of the day to planning our approach. The initial action was a formal cease and desist notification dispatched by messenger and registered post to Brenda Stone individually, to every HOA board member, and to the building firm. This document unequivocally stated my proprietorship of the property, referenced my own carefully documented survey, and insisted upon an instant stop to all building work and the departure from the site. It further highlighted, quite directly, the stringent sanctions detailed in the trust regulating the land for unapproved development, alluding to sums that would cause them considerable distress. Naturally, I did not anticipate Brenda would simply capitulate. That same afternoon, subsequent to the messenger's probable delivery, my telephone chimed. The caller identification indicated Whispering Pines HOA. I allowed it to proceed to voicemail. The communication, upon later review, was quintessential Brenda, beginning with feigned solicitude, then intensifying to outraged menaces. Mr. Henderson, Brenda Stone here. I am in receipt of a highly confrontational letter from your legal representative. It appears there is some confusion. We are functioning completely within our entitlements. This undertaking is crucial. Your efforts to impede it are baseless and, candidly, malevolent. Should you continue, the HOA will have no choice but to initiate legal proceedings against you for vexation and for endeavoring to sabotage a major community endeavor. We possess substantial means, Mr. Henderson. Regard this as your ultimate amicable caution. Amicable caution, indeed. The ensuing several days involved a surge of action on my part, combining discreet surveillance with thorough groundwork. I had inconspicuous, high-definition, motion-triggered trail cameras, the type employed for observing wildlife, positioned along the boundary of my land, providing views of the construction zone from multiple perspectives. These were not inexpensive surveillance devices from a large retail outlet. They were professional quality, weather-resistant units able to record distinct pictures around the clock. My goal was to maintain an uninterrupted chronicle of their encroachment. Each vehicle, each laborer, and every item of machinery introduced to my property was meticulously recorded. Additionally, I dedicated time to traversing the authentic boundary lines, those validated by my precise survey and the coded indicators, capturing new geolocated photographs and video footage that distinctly illustrated the scope of their infringement. The disparity between their substandard survey and the genuine topography of the land was glaring. In the meantime, Brenda and the HOA predictably disregarded the cease and desist order. Work on the community lodge proceeded, perhaps even with renewed haste. I could almost perceive Brenda's voice internally. Maintain full momentum. Do not allow that eccentric farmer to daunt us. They were progressively worsening their own predicament. Each cubic yard of cement cast, each framework of studs assembled, contributed to the ultimate cost they would incur. Ms. Albright was overjoyed. Allow them to construct, she had chortled via telephone. The greater their investment in their unlawful structure, the more influential our position becomes. We are not merely aiming for its demolition, Mr. Henderson. We are pursuing punitive damages that will cause their perfectly groomed yards to wither. Next, the penalties began. Small pink notices started to materialize in my letterbox, situated at the termination of my drive, technically at the fringe of what they deemed their domain. There were penalties for unapproved signs, alluding to the legally mandated no trespassing notices Ms. Albright had counseled me to erect following the cease and desist to further confirm their willful transgression. Penalties for environmental disturbance. Evidently, my flourishing organic vegetable patch, positioned a considerable distance from the building work yet observable from their development, affronted their sense of aesthetics. Penalties for not upholding property to community benchmarks. Every penalty was meticulously captured in photographs, recorded, and transmitted to Ms. Albright, who incorporated them into the escalating collection of proof. The sheer audacity was astounding. They were penalizing me for merely being on my own property while they were concurrently engaged in grand larceny against it. One of Brenda's accomplices on the board, an anxious-appearing individual named Gerald who perpetually seemed to be perspiring, actually came up to me one evening while I was retrieving my mail. "Mr. Henderson," he faltered, "Brenda requested I speak with you. Perhaps we could reach some sort of agreement, a modest compensation for your trouble." He appeared as though he would prefer to be anywhere but there. "A modest compensation, Gerald?" I inquired, my tone perilously quiet. "For the pilfering of my property, the ruin of a heritage site, the falsified papers, and the flagrant contempt for legal notifications? What sum did Brenda envision for that trouble?" Gerald blanched. She suggested a few thousand, and possibly a lifelong pass to the new lodge." I nearly guffawed. A lifelong pass to a hotel constructed unlawfully on my own purloined land. The absolute unmitigated effrontery. "Gerald," I stated, fixing my gaze directly on him, "inform Brenda that her proposal is insulting. Inform her that with each day she perpetuates this charade, the cost escalates. And inform her that Ms. Albright conveys her compliments." Gerald all but dashed back toward the immaculate cul-de-sacs of Whispering Pines. The snare was not merely arranged, it was furnished with bait, and the prey was feasting, entirely unaware of the metallic teeth gradually constricting about them. The brilliance of the agricultural trust we had instituted lay in its graduated penalty structure. Small infringements set off monetary fines. Significant building work, particularly of a commercial nature, undertaken without the unanimous, notarized approval of all trustees, one of whom was my irascible, conservation-minded Aunt Millie. Residing in distant Alaska and loathing HOAs with fervent intensity, activated an immediate lien on all holdings of the transgressing entity and required the total demolition of any culpable structures, along with comprehensive ecological restoration solely at their cost. Brenda was on the verge of learning that Aunt Millie did not approve of unpermitted boutique hotels on ancestral property. The building of the community lodge, as Brenda ostentatiously termed her three-level testament to arrogance, proceeded at a furious speed. It seemed as though through sheer determination and swift construction she could validate her assertion. Each dawn, the reverberation of trucks and the whine of machinery acted as an irritating morning call. They were now constructing the framework for the third story, the roof supports were piled close by, and a team had started fitting windows on the initial floors. It was beginning to resemble less of a bare concrete structure and more of a genuine edifice, an indelible mark upon my terrain. Observing them invest ever more funds and materials into their unlawful enterprise was exasperating. However, Ms. Albright's guidance remained steadfast. "Fortitude, Mr. Henderson. Each nail they drive is an additional nail in their own demise. We allow them to become complacent. We allow them to think they have triumphed. The ensuing surprise will be correspondingly magnified and our argument for the highest possible compensation significantly reinforced. I must confess to a degree of somber contentment in carefully chronicling their advancements, aware that every new element merely augmented their culpability. My trail cameras operated continuously, recording not only the building process itself but also several quite noteworthy unguarded instances. Brenda Stone posturing for a local television team she had summoned to produce a flattering report on the thrilling new communal facility, board members exchanging congratulatory gestures. Even an after-hours arrival of what appeared to be dubiously expensive culinary appliances for the small cafe. Everything was catalogued and time-stamped. One afternoon, an unfamiliar, polished black sedan proceeded up my drive. A gentleman in a costly suit emerged, holding a slender leather attaché case. He presented himself as Mr. Sterling, legal representative for the Whispering Pines HOA. He possessed a more refined demeanor than Brenda, not as openly combative, yet with a subtle air of patronizing command. "Mr. Henderson," he commenced, his smile as impeccable as his footwear, "I am present to deliberate on a settlement. Brenda Stone and the board are troubled by the confrontational nature this matter has assumed. They sincerely feel they are operating in the paramount interest of the community. Their paramount interest includes falsifying deeds and erecting structures on land they do not possess?" I inquired, maintaining a non-committal expression. Sterling gestured dismissively. "Minor inconsistencies in documentation, Mr. Henderson, readily correctable. The truth is, the lodge is significantly advanced. Demolishing it at this stage would be financially impractical for all involved." He paused, evidently anticipating my acceptance of this reasoning. "What the HOA suggests," he went on, "is a substantial remuneration package for the tract in dispute, considerably exceeding its market value, and, naturally, abandoning all this acrimony with your legal counsel." He stated a sum. It was considerable, undoubtedly more than the undeveloped land might command in a typical transaction. Yet, this was no typical transaction. This was larceny disguised in a custom-made suit. "Mr. Sterling," I declared, "my property was never available for purchase, and no sum of money can atone for deceit and the intentional ruin of a heritage site. The sole resolution that interests me entails the removal of that edifice, the reinstatement of my land, and holding the responsible parties accountable." Sterling's smile wavered, just for an instant. "That is an impractical stance, Mr. Henderson. The judiciary tends to prefer resolutions that prevent excessive economic squandering. Considering the extent of construction progress." "Economic squandering?" I interjected. "The only squandering here is the HOA's funds lavished on an unlawful project on land they knowingly, or at least with profound carelessness, usurped. The trust agreements pertaining to this land are unequivocally clear regarding the remedies for such an infraction. Complete demolition and reinstatement. No waivers." I detected a flicker of something in his gaze. He was aware of the trust. They had evidently had someone review the documents by now, likely after Ms. Albright's initial communication. He was present to ascertain if I would yield, if I could be placated before the full impact of those provisions descended. Perhaps even untenably. So we believe its enforceability is debatable in this situation. "Ms. Albright holds a contrary opinion," I retorted, "and she possesses an outstanding record." He exhaled, a dramatic affectation of annoyance. "Mr. Henderson, the HOA is ready to contest this forcefully. It will be costly, protracted, and exceedingly disagreeable for all parties. Are you certain you wish to pursue that path when a perfectly sensible financial accord is available?" This was their ultimate endeavor to cow me, to instill doubt in my determination. They were wagering I lacked the fortitude or the means for a prolonged judicial confrontation. They were mistaken. "The only path I am interested in, Mr. Sterling," I stated, "is the one that results in that monstrosity being taken apart, brick by pilfered brick. You may inform Brenda Stone that her community lodge is encountering a minor and enduring zoning complication. It is designated my property." Sterling's composure finally fractured. His features tensed, and his eyes turned frigid. "You will come to regret this, Henderson. The HOA will not be intimidated." He spun on his heel, re-entered the sedan, and departed at speed, sending gravel flying. The menace did not disturb me. If anything, it solidified my resolve. They were transparently anxious. Their attempt at deception had been exposed. A few days thereafter, I received an unannounced visitor. It was Mrs. Henderson, no relation, a reserved elderly lady residing at the periphery of Whispering Pines, whose land abutted a segment of my property farther from the construction. She was among the initial homeowners, predating Brenda's oppressive regime. She appeared apprehensive, grasping a small, plain envelope. "Mr. Henderson," she uttered in a low voice, looking about as if anticipating Brenda might emerge from the shrubbery. I could not remain quiet. "What they are undertaking is unjust. Brenda," she coerced the board. "The majority of them are frightened of her." She presented me with the envelope. This was placed under my door. "I believe you ought to examine it." Within was an unsigned, typed message and a USB drive. The message was concise. Brenda Stone accepted inducements from the main contractor for the lodge undertaking. She advocated for particular, excessively priced vendors. "Scrutinize the HOA financial records if you can obtain unedited versions." She is also arranging to rent the lodge's cafe and gymnasium to her nephew at an absurdly minimal charge. This is not for the community's benefit, it is for her own financial gain. Best of luck. The USB drive held scanned images of what seemed to be internal HOA email correspondence and preliminary budget proposals for the lodge, with certain expenditures grossly exaggerated compared to prevailing industry rates. Additionally, there were emails from Brenda to her nephew regarding the highly favorable terms for the cafe. This was potent material. "Mrs. Henderson," I said, my voice suffused with appreciation, "this is exceptionally beneficial. I am grateful for your bravery." She merely inclined her head, a melancholic expression in her eyes. "I simply desire for our community to revert to being a community, not her personal dominion." This fresh intelligence contributed another dimension to our legal position. Ms. Albright was elated. "Oh, this is exquisite," she cooed, perusing the proof. "Deceit, self-enrichment, violation of fiduciary responsibility. Brenda Stone is not merely erecting an unlawful hotel, she is managing a criminal operation. This alters the entire dynamic. We can now penetrate the HOA's corporate shield and pursue board members individually, not solely for the property issue but for financial misconduct. They will be unable to shelter behind HOA immunity." The HOA, meanwhile, blissfully ignorant of the new evidence we held, persisted in their confrontational stance. They actually attempted to lodge a slap suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation against me, asserting my legal objections were intended to silence them and amounted to harassment. It was a desperate, obvious maneuver, and Ms. Albright had it thrown out so swiftly it likely left Brenda astounded. They even possessed the effrontery to dispatch a survey team, a different one this time, onto my land without notice, attempting to install new boundary indicators based on their fraudulent survey. My trail cameras recorded the entire event. I calmly contacted the sheriff, showed my own survey records and deed, and had the team removed for trespassing. The chief surveyor appeared deeply chagrined, murmuring something about receiving erroneous information from the HOA. Brenda's minor error in judgment, as she likely perceived it, was about to escalate into a comprehensive disaster of her own creation. She believed she was engaged in a game of chess, but she was playing checkers against a superior opponent, and she had just toppled her own monarch. The groundwork was complete. All our proof was gathered, our legal arguments refined. It was time to cease defensive maneuvers and deliver the decisive blow. The moment had arrived to formally lower the boom. Ms. Albright, with a theatricality that implied she was revealing a work of art, submitted an extensive lawsuit in state court. It was a masterpiece of legal drafting, a veritable compendium of the Whispering Pines HOA's offenses. The charges encompass trespass, ejectment, the legal process for removing someone from one's land, quiet title to definitively establish my ownership, fraudulent misrepresentation, civil conspiracy, conversion. For the resources they had utilized, unjust enrichment, and a request for declaratory relief to nullify their counterfeit deed and invalid permits. Critically, it identified not only the HOA as a corporate body but also Brenda Stone and every complicit board member individually, referencing their direct awareness, their deceptive practices. And, courtesy of Mrs. Henderson's anonymous informant, their breach of fiduciary duty and potential self-dealing. The lawsuit called for not just the immediate stop of all operations and the complete dismantling of the community lodge at the HOA's cost, but also full ecological reinstatement of my farmland to its pre-trespass state. an audit of all HOA finances connected to the project, and, naturally, significant punitive damages intended to serve as a warning to others. The amount we sought was sufficient to make an experienced CFO despair. We also petitioned for an immediate temporary restraining order and a preliminary injunction to stop construction while the lawsuit was pending. The hearing for the injunction was set with remarkable swiftness. Brenda Stone and her retinue, which included Mr. Sterling and a pair of exceedingly anxious-looking board members, were in attendance. Brenda herself appeared supremely self-assured, even casting a derisive glance at me as I sat with Ms. Albright at the plaintiff's counsel table. She evidently trusted her lawyer's claims that this was merely a trivial lawsuit they would easily dismiss. Ms. Albright commenced by laying out the foundational proof: my family's property titles extending back over a century, the meticulously drafted and filed survey from prior to my journey, and the comprehensive papers related to the agricultural trust, with its unambiguous prohibitions against unapproved commercial building and its severe penalty provisions. She then systematically deconstructed the HOA's assertions. She presented the court with the HOA's submitted survey, underscoring its inaccuracies and contradictions with official county documents, and juxtaposed it with my own certified survey. She displayed the forged quitclaim deed, indicating the anomalies in the signature and notary mark, even proposing to call in a forensic document specialist. Following this was the proof of their willful trespass: copies of our cease and desist letters, complete with confirmation of receipt, along with photographs and time-stamped video evidence from my trail cameras demonstrating construction proceeding without interruption long after those letters had been delivered. She even played a brief, incriminating segment of Brenda on that local news feature, magnificently declaring, "We seized the opportunity to develop this neglected parcel for the advantage of all Whispering Pines inhabitants." A declaration made weeks after she had received our legal notification. Brenda's derisive expression started to wane. Mr. Sterling raised objections often, but the judge, a seasoned magistrate known for her direct approach, overruled him more frequently than not, her attention clearly captured by the accumulating evidence. Then Ms. Albright unveiled her decisive evidence, the proof of financial misconduct. She submitted the anonymous emails, the exaggerated budget outlines for the lodge, and Brenda's correspondence with her nephew concerning the cafe lease. "Your Honor," Ms. Albright declared, her voice resonating with certainty, "this is not merely a case of a property line disagreement. This is a deliberate plot by the HOA president and certain board members to swindle their own members and profit personally, utilizing Mr. Henderson's land as their unwilling instrument. They did not simply err, they participated in a consistent pattern of intentional falsehood and wrongdoing." One could have heard a pin drop. Brenda Stone's countenance had shifted from smug to tense, then to a blotchy shade of enraged crimson. The board members at her side appeared as if they wished the ground would open up and consume them. Mr. Sterling was disarraying his documents, his prior suavity entirely vanished. The judge regarded Brenda. "Miss Stone, these are exceptionally grave accusations. Do you have an immediate rebuttal to the evidence regarding potential financial irregularities and self-enrichment in the building of this lodge on land whose ownership is, at best, highly contested?" Brenda stood, sputtering, "This is preposterous, defamatory. That farmer he's attempting to blackmail us. The lodge is a community resource. Those emails they're misrepresented. It's all perfectly above board." Her voice was piercing, her self-possession destroyed. The judge merely lifted an eyebrow. "Ms. Albright, you referred to an agricultural trust with particular penalty clauses?" "Indeed, Your Honor," Ms. Albright responded, passing a copy of the pertinent section to the bailiff for the judge. "The trust, which predates any of the HOA's activities, mandates that any unapproved commercial building initiates, among other consequences, an automatic assumption of responsibility for complete demolition and reinstatement, plus liquidated damages figured at 3 times the appraised worth of the additions or the land, whichever sum is larger, payable to the trust for restoration and agricultural preservation initiatives. It also empowers the trustees to impose an immediate lien on the holdings of the offending parties to guarantee these damages." The judge perused the clause, her face inscrutable. After a lengthy pause, she raised her head. "Mr. Sterling, does your client challenge the existence or prior filing of this trust?" Sterling gulped. "Your Honor, we dispute its relevance and the fairness of its conditions in this particular instance. We contend it represents an illegal penalty." "An illegal penalty for an illegal action," the judge reflected. An intriguing line of reasoning. She then redirected her attention to the HOA group. based on the initial evidence submitted, especially the unambiguous prior deeds and surveys furnished by the plaintiff and the rather persuasive proof of the defendant's conduct despite formal warning of contested ownership, this court determines a strong probability that the plaintiff will succeed on the merits. Brenda let out a gasp. Consequently, the judge proceeded, her tone resolute, "I am issuing the temporary restraining order. All building and operations on the contested parcel must halt without delay. I am also arranging an expedited hearing for the preliminary injunction, and I strongly recommend the HOA board secure independent legal representation distinct from Ms. Stone, considering the accusations of internal wrongdoing. Furthermore, I am mandating a complete, independent audit of the Whispering Pines HOA's financial records concerning this project to be supervised by a court-designated master." The gavel descended with a thud that mirrored Brenda Stone's dramatic downfall. She appeared utterly dumbfounded. Her vision of a community lodge was disintegrating before her, and she was being publicly shamed and implicated in grave misconduct. The board members were urgently conferring in hushed tones, their faces pale. As we departed the courtroom, Ms. Albright offered me a subtle thumbs up. The snare hadn't merely closed, it had decimated them. The supposed minor error in judgment had burgeoned into a legal and financial catastrophe for Brenda and her allies. The initial tremor was merely the start. The confrontation was not concluded, but the momentum had definitively shifted. The monstrosity on my land fell silent for the first time in months, a testament not to communal solidarity but to avarice, conceit, and the astounding misjudgment of a reserved farmer possessing an unbreakable trust and an exceptionally skilled lawyer. The repercussions of that courtroom spectacle were nothing less than cataclysmic for Whispering Pines. The temporary restraining order struck them with the force of a physical impact. Construction teams disappeared almost instantly. The partially completed community lodge stood in unnerving silence, a concrete framework stripped bare by the gales of legal loss. The court-selected auditor descended upon the HOA's financial records like a raptor on a field mouse, and the initial discoveries, disseminated to the local media not by my doing, I should clarify, though I did find pleasure in reading about them with my morning coffee, were devastating. Overstated invoices, disbursements to fictitious corporations seemingly connected to the main contractor, and a proposed rental contract for the cafe and gym to Brenda Stone's nephew that was so biased it was virtually a handout. The HOA members, formerly intimidated by Brenda's forceful rule or simply indifferent, were abruptly alert and incensed. Urgent assemblies were convened, not by Brenda but by a newly established collective of troubled homeowners. Brenda, divested of her capacity to shape the story and confronting possible personal culpability, was notably missing, purportedly receiving medical attention for stress. Her escalade was cited with decreasing frequency. The remaining board members, those who had not already stepped down in ignominy, were desperately trying to manage the situation. They promptly engaged their own separate legal counsel as the judge had recommended, and their initial step was to publicly disassociate themselves from Brenda Stone and her oversight of the lodge endeavor. They released a formal apology, not to me, not immediately, but to the HOA constituents, for the absence of diligence, and pledged complete cooperation with the audit and the judicial process. It was a textbook example of opportunists abandoning a failing enterprise. Ms. Albright and I capitalized on our strengthened position. With the injunction securely established and the HOA's legal standing appearing increasingly bleak with each passing day, settlement discussions commenced seriously. This time, Mr. Sterling was significantly more restrained, his expensive suit appearing somewhat creased, his assurance supplanted by a tired sense of realism. The HOA's new legal advisor, a down-to-earth woman named Ms. Davies, was also in attendance. Brenda was conspicuously absent. Her attorney conveyed that she was unable to participate firsthand. Mr. Henderson, Ms. Albright, Ms. Davies started, "My clients, the current board of the Whispering Pines HOA, wish to convey their deepest apologies for this whole affair. They were deceived." Ms. Albright lifted an eyebrow. Deceived into document falsification, unlawful entry, and disregarding numerous legal advisories, Ms. Davies? There were considerable shortcomings in proper procedure and oversight, Ms. Davies admitted adeptly, which they are presently striving to amend. The HOA is ready to propose a significant monetary agreement to settle all disputes and, of course, to see to the dismantling of the edifice on your client's land. This was the critical juncture. The dismantling aspect was vital. There was no further discussion of financial impracticality. They understood it had to be demolished. We dedicated several days to finalizing the specifics. The monetary settlement was, in fact, considerable. It encompassed my legal costs, restitution for the harm to my property, the disturbance to my existence and livelihood, and a substantial payment to the agricultural trust as per its penalty provisions. This amount would be allocated to regional conservation initiatives and agricultural learning schemes, an outcome I found especially gratifying. However, the core of the accord was the demolition and reinstatement strategy. It was insufficient for them to merely tear it down. They were required to dismantle it meticulously, eliminate all remnants of concrete, reshape the terrain to its initial state using my pre-trespass land surveys, and, most crucially, hire a specialized ecological restoration company, sanctioned by me, to treat the soil and replant the site with indigenous flora, including attempting to reintroduce those uncommon bog orchids from adjacent protected seed sources, if feasible. The entire undertaking was to be recorded and was contingent upon my review and ultimate consent. The expense of this element alone was immense, greatly surpassing their prior investment in the construction. Then arrived Brenda Stone's individual day of reckoning. Distinct from the HOA's agreement, Brenda, confronted with the irrefutable proof of deceit and self-enrichment and the likelihood of a protracted and highly publicized trial that might result in criminal indictments, consented to a personal settlement. It was not as substantial as if we had proceeded to trial and prevailed on every charge, perhaps, but it was sizable enough to guarantee she would experience the financial repercussions for a considerable duration. She was compelled to sell her cherished Escalade and move from her excessively large residence in Whispering Pines. Furthermore, she was permanently prohibited from ever occupying any role on any HOA board within the state, a minor yet pleasing stipulation Ms. Albright insisted upon. The local district attorney's office, prompted by the auditor's findings, did initiate an inquiry into her financial activities, which I later learned culminated in a plea agreement involving substantial fines and community service, although she narrowly evaded imprisonment. Her standing, however, was utterly destroyed. The monarch of Whispering Pines had been overthrown and banished from her own domain. The dismantling of the community lodge was a deliberate, unhurried affair, the opposite of its presumptuous erection. I observed from a respectful remove as the teams took it apart section by section. There was an understated solemnity to the deconstruction, a feeling that equilibrium was being re-established. The day the final piece of concrete was removed and the ecological restoration crew commenced their efforts, incorporating organic matter and painstakingly planting native vegetation and young trees, was a day of immense contentment and quiet victory. It required nearly a full year for the land to start to regain its previous appearance. The vestiges remained, subtle impressions where the foundations had lain, but the natural world is tenacious. The bog orchids, defying expectations, began to show evidence of establishing themselves in their newly prepared environment. The Whispering Pines HOA, under a new, more contrite administration, evolved into a surprisingly considerate neighbor. They were more modest, less affluent, but more astute. They even sought my input on a new community garden initiative on their own property this time, and I was pleased to provide some guidance. The ordeal had, paradoxically, cultivated a peculiar kind of rapport, if not precisely camaraderie. My farm, my ancestral land, was once again tranquil, disturbed only by the melodies of birds and the sigh of the wind through the foliage. The legal snare, so meticulously devised, had not only succeeded but had also facilitated a degree of justice and beneficial transformation I had not entirely foreseen. It acted as a potent illustration that while conceit and avarice can construct dominions, however modest, integrity and perseverance can cause them to collapse. So that is the story of how I found myself with a very costly, very short-lived, and very unlawful hotel on my land, and how the HOA president responsible for its construction learned that some unassuming farmers possess exceptionally strong foundations and even more astute legal intellects.